Hi there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Megan Lenz. I'm the Senior Communications Manager here at Cure SMA. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're going to hold on for just a second to give a few more folks a chance to join us. I did want to let you know in the either probably the right side of your screen or the top part of your screen, as you look at our presentation, you're going to see a little panel called Questions. Many of you submitted your questions beforehand. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to continue to take questions throughout the webinar. So please use that function to submit questions as you think of them. Right now, you should be seeing a mostly purple slide that says FDA interactions in the patient-focused drug development meeting, and of course, hearing my voice. If you're having technical difficulties, use the chat window to contact us, and we'll try to get that settled for you. But again, we're going to get started in just about one more minute, give a few more folks a chance to join us. All right, thank you again, everyone, for holding. We are ready to get started. Again, my name is Megan Lenz. I'm the Senior Communications Manager here at Cure SMA, and I will be moderating this webinar. I want to give you a couple quick reminders before we get a start. Again, the question function, I already mentioned it, but please be submitting your questions throughout the webinar. Again, there's probably a little box either on the right or top of your screen that allows you to do that. Please submit as many questions as you have. We're not sure if we'll quite get to them all in this hour, but we certainly keep them on hand and use them to guide future communication. I did also want to let you know that we will be recording this webinar and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. So you can look out either on the YouTube channel or in our news section, curesma.org/news, and we'll have it up there within the next couple of days. After the webinar, you can go ahead and register for the Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting. If you're not sure what that means quite yet, don't worry. We're going to get to that within this webinar. I split the URL on the screen, and then also our info@curesma.org email address, which is what you can use if you have any questions. I did also want to remind you, I know we have many international folks listening in today. Welcome. We're very happy to have you with us and have you listening in. However, this webinar is going to be focused on U.S. issues only. Before we get to our first presenter, I'm just going to turn it over to Kenneth Hobby, our president, for a couple quick opening remarks.
So I think what I just wanted to do very quickly was try and set the scene for what is going to be covered in this particular webinar. And so obviously we've got some representatives from the FDA on. And so we're looking at what are the interactions between patients, the patient community, and the FDA. What we obviously had was really kind of great news, amazing news that came in December with the approval of Spinraza. And I think part of what we want to say is thank you to the FDA as well for their role in that, in getting to that result, which was much sooner than expected. And we really got that amazing result of the very broad label, the full label for all ages and all types. So that was a really great result. That is not the topic for this webinar. In a lot of ways, the FDA's kind of done their job with Spinraza, and that's now passed on to kind of the next stage where it's the company Biogen and ourselves and hospitals that are really kind of focused on the access side. But that's, you know, the FDA's gone through that part. There's definitely some great learning and examples looking at what happened there with the way that the trials were run, the good data that came out, and the way that we as a SMA patient community interacted with the FDA. And I think that's one of the key things to look at as we kind of look forward now to what comes next. We've obviously got the first approval. Now we're really kind of focused on, okay, what's changed now in terms of how we get the second, third, fourth drugs approved with the FDA? What do we need to kind of focus on now in how trials are conducted and questions like that? So that's really what this particular webinar is focused on. Not the first approval that we got, but now what do we need to do? We need multiple therapies, and so that's going to be what we actually focus on. I think the other thing I'll say is what we set up is what we've put out is we look at the FDA as a part of our community. And I think that is one of the key takeaways from the Spinraza approval, the way that we interacted with informal interactions, families going in to talk, more rigorous data that we gave from the patient community on meaningful benefit. All those things were a great example, I think, which contributed to that first approval, and I think hopefully will set us up well for this next stage. And then I think the final item that all this, the topics that we cover, everything on this webinar will lead to is the opportunity that we've got coming up in April for this patient-focused drug development meeting and that very exciting opportunity. So this is, I think, in some ways setting the stage for that meeting that's going to happen in April. So Megan, do you want to take it back?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kenneth. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter, Dr. Deb Gillipoli, who is a medical officer with the Orphan Products Development Division of the FDA.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, my name is Devanan Gillipoli. I'm with the Office of Orphan Products, the Food and Drug Administration. Today, I will briefly cover 4 topics: clinical trial control groups, evaluating trial data, benefit risk assessment, and labeling. The intent of my talk is to provide a very general overview of broad principles governing these 4 topics. Hopefully, you will find this information useful as you prepare for the upcoming patient-focused drug development meeting. I will not be discussing specific regulatory issues concerning drug development in SMA, as these need to be discussed case by case with the relevant regulatory division within the FDA. Next slide. For the approval of a drug in the United States, the law requires that there is a substantial evidence that the drug will do what it claims to do, and that this substantial evidence is based on the results of adequate and well-controlled investigations. What adequate and well-controlled investigations means will be discussed in the next few slides. Next slide. So why are clinical investigations or trials conducted? The main purpose is to distinguish the effects of a drug from other influences such as spontaneous change in the course of disease, placebo effect, or biased observation. Diseases or their manifestations fluctuate a lot from day to day, week to week, month to month. Some diseases spontaneously improve or resolve on their own. So if a drug is given to patients with such a disease and they improve, we need to know if they improved because of the drug or if the disease resolved on its own. Some influences are more important in some diseases than in others. Patients with certain diseases indicate that they improved a lot simply by participating in a trial and were later shown to be taking a placebo. This is called a placebo effect. So if a drug is given to patients with these types of diseases and patients show improvement, we need to know if the improvement is simply a placebo effect or if it is due to the drug. Or some investigators who are observing patients with a disease may make biased observations if they know that all patients under observation are taking the drug of interest. So we need a way to find out what the drug actually does by distinguishing its effects from these influences. Next slide. This slide lists some characteristics of adequate and well-controlled trials. In the previous slide, I stated that we need a way to find out what the drug actually does by distinguishing its effects from other influences. One important means by which we try to distinguish what the drug effect from other influences is by using a study design that has a control group, appropriately selects subjects, and minimizes bias. Next slide. This slide lists several control groups. I will focus on the first and the last controls listed on this slide. The most common and most efficient control is the placebo concurrent control. In this study design, there are 2 control groups, one group taking the experimental study drug and the other group taking a placebo. But just because there is a control group, it is not adequate for valid comparison. Both groups must be identical, except that there is one difference. One group is taking the experimental study drug, and the other group is not. So in a disease that has varying survival, it would not be a fair comparison to compare one group with all patients having a very short survival and another group having all patients with long survival. So how can we ensure that both groups are nearly identical? This is done by a process called randomization, where every patient enrolling in the study has an equal chance of getting assigned to either study group. This way, the only difference between the two study groups is that one group is taking the experimental drug and the other group is not. So if there's any difference between the two, we can ascribe the difference to the study drug. The last control in this list is historical controls. It is not a randomized group, so it's hard to know what sort of biases exist between the two groups and whether the two groups of patients are comparable for a valid comparison. Historical controls may be useful when the drug effect is very large, obvious, and outside the known documented range of the disease. But more often, the experimental drugs have a more modest benefit, in which case concurrent placebo control groups allows you to spot the difference, but is difficult to do so with a historical control. Next slide. Remember in the previous slide, I said that randomization is a process where every patient enrolling in the study has an equal chance of getting assigned to either group. So if there is a real difference between the two randomized groups, that difference could be because of the drug effect. However, there are also other explanations for this difference between the treatment and the control groups, and they could be bias, chance, and rarely fraud. One important means by which bias is minimized during the conduct of a study is by a process called blinding, so-called double blinding, when both investigators and participating patients don't know who is getting the experimental drug and who is getting placebo. A study can also be positive, that is, difference between the two groups can be seen simply by chance. Rarely, fraud on the part of those conducting the study can also lead to differences between the two treatment groups. Analysis of data during the review of a new drug application attempts to answer questions. Can the effects of the drug be distinguished from other influences? Is there a real difference between the treatment group and the control group? Is this due to drug effect, or is it due to bias, or is it due to chance, or is it due to fraud? In the end, analysis of results of study should be adequate to assess the effects of the drug. Next slide. Over the years, many patients, such as yourself, with many serious and life-threatening diseases have told, and indeed continue to tell the FDA that they would accept greater risks or side effects from products that treat life-threatening and severely debilitating illnesses than they would accept from products that treat less serious illnesses. This has become a guiding principle for the FDA in its benefit-risk assessments of a drug for a given life-threatening disease. That is, the benefit of a drug needs to be evaluated in the light of the severity of the disease being evaluated. Next slide. So what does benefit-risk assessments involve? In a nutshell, it is weighing the benefits of a drug against the known and potential risks of the drug, taking into consideration the severity of the disease. For example, in a disease in which the lifespan is only a few years, a drug is shown to have a large benefit. For example, an increase in survival by several years. Such a benefit can potentially outweigh significant risks. On the other hand, if in a disease that is not serious or life-threatening, a drug shows only a modest benefit, risks should be minimal to justify the small benefit. You, the patients, are an important part of benefit-risk assessment. FDA wants to hear from you. Meetings like the Patient-Focused Drug Development, advisory committees, or avenues where you can be heard. You can also explore ways to work with sponsors who are developing drugs so that the studies can evaluate what is important to you by using appropriate endpoints. FDA wants to know what is important to you. What is it that you consider as being beneficial to you? What kind of risks are acceptable to you? Next slide. Labeling is a summary of essential scientific information needed to use safely and effectively the approved drug. It is not only informative, but needs to be accurate and based on data. FDA carefully determines how the available clinical data can be generalized, in other words, to be applied to disease subtypes. In general, there must be some clinical data or some information available to make that determination. With that, I'll stop here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I just want to shout out another quick reminder about questions before we move on to our next presenter. We've already seen some great questions coming in, so please continue to send those. I do want to remind our audience that our participants are not going to be able to answer questions on specific drug programs, so please focus your questions more on the broader issues at play. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Selena Miller, who is a health programs coordinator at the FDA, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the different ways that our community can interact with the FDA.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Selena Miller, as Megan pointed out, and I work within the FDA's Office of Health and Constituent Affairs, and I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk with you about how the agency engages with patients. Next slide. So just quickly, I'll cover an overview of our office, discuss a little of why patient input is important to what we do, some of the challenges to engagement, and talk a little bit more about engagement activities within the agency. Next slide. So our office, the Office of Health and Constituent Affairs, resides within the Office of the Commissioner and has been involved in patient engagement since the 90s during the HIV epidemic. We had started the agency's Patient Representative program at the time, and I'll discuss a little bit more about the program in the next couple of slides. So the office is segmented into two teams. We have the health professional team and the patient team. And on the patient team, which is where I am, we have 8 team members led by Richard Klein, and each of us have designated areas to cover in terms of stakeholder engagement. I've had the privilege of covering neurological issues for some time. Next slide. So by virtue of residing within the Office of the Commissioner, we service all of the agency centers and offices and really lead much of the agency's patient engagement and stakeholder outreach efforts. Now, the medical product centers also have their own patient engagement activities, but we have our own directives and programs. Next slide. So before I go into some of the examples, I thought I'd share why patient input is so important to what we do here at the agency. In 2012, the agency passed the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, which included a provision, Section 1137, which aims to incorporating the patient voice much earlier in the medical product development cycle. But it's really important to note that the agency has been in the business of patient engagement long before that. We want you to know what issues are important to you, those living with the disease or condition, and as a result, we learn what patients' needs and wants are, what meaningful endpoints and targets are, and what adverse events may take place. Patients are really the human element of what we do. Next slide. Now, getting patients to engage doesn't come without its challenges. For example, it's really not easy for patients to understand trial design or the regulatory framework. There is sometimes legal and practical limitations facing sponsors. We've seen situations where there's a division within patient communities that can make things challenging, such as different objectives or agendas within the community, such as different thoughts on what is meaningful. So the challenges are there. Next slide. Now, what our office does to help educate the patient advocacy communities, and sometimes we find ways to connect them with experts here at the agency. We host meetings with groups, we speak to patients and professional associations, we respond to inquiries and requests from patients and advocacy organizations on a daily basis. And we essentially help patients navigate us. But our office helps not only to educate, but also to clarify any misconceptions. We've been told So we help demystify the agency, as some say. Next slide. So some of the ways we engage with patients, we hold listening sessions. These are closed meetings with patients and caregivers, and really is a way for the divisions to learn more about a disease or condition so that they're better able to review applications when they come in. We regularly help patient groups connect with leadership and key principals within the center so they can share firsthand the issues that they face with their condition. We also hold webinars to serve as tutorials. Explains what goes on in the agency so that the public can learn more about the regulatory process. And we have Twitter chats. We held one last year for Diabetes Awareness Month with the American Association of Diabetes Educators, and we also had one late last year with Consumers United for Evidence-Based Healthcare. Next slide. So one of the major ways our office helps to bring patient voices directly to the table is through our flagship program, the FDA Patient Representative Program. As I mentioned, it started in the 90s with the HIV Patient Representatives, and now it has grown to over 200 patients and caregivers that represent over 300 conditions, including SMA. We use patient reps primarily as advisory committee meetings, divisional assignments, and sometimes in listening sessions and in other various ways as well. Next slide. So a few years back, what came as outgrowth of the program is the FDA Patient Network. It's a website geared for patients, and it highlights ways that patients can get involved. On the site, you can learn about drug and device approval process, upcoming agency-sponsored meetings, webinars, clinicaltrials.gov, and about other treatment options. And you can subscribe to our Patient Network newsletter by going to the website www.fda.gov/for-patients found on the slide. Next slide. The two other major initiatives that our office is working on is the Patient Engagement Cluster and the Patient Engagement Collaborative. The cluster is an international work group that was created to enhance and streamline information sharing with the EMA, the European Medicines Agency. They focus on activities involving patients within the drugs, biologics, regulatory life cycle, and they develop common goals of expanding future engagement activities with patients. The Patient Engagement Collaborative is a forum of thought leaders from patient advocacy communities and regulators to talk about strategies for increasing patient engagement activities within the agency. It's really a joint effort between the agency and the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. Next slide. So late last year, our office coordinated about 6 listening sessions that brought together about 60 organizations. The sessions were on various topics listed here on this slide, and we were happy to have SMA at our rare disease listening session. The purpose of these listening sessions were really to have an organization's leadership meet with the then Commissioner Califf and key leadership within the agency so that they could learn firsthand from the groups what key priority areas are on their plate and also learn of any recommendations for enhancements moving forward. Next slide. So as a result, over the years, we've built quite a bit of a number of relationships with organizations and patient groups. And this slide, I think, captures just a few of them. We have Cure SMA on there, ALS Association, Jet Foundation, National Center for Health Research, and a number of others. Next slide. I wanted to add this slide in somewhere in my presentation because I think it's a good visual for you to show areas where patients intersect with the medical product development and review timelines. At the bottom far right, where it says advisory committee meetings, that's really where patients can engage at the time the agency holds these meetings that discuss whether a product can be recommended for approval or discuss whether there are safety issues with an already approved product, for example. Patient representatives participate on the panel, but they're mostly public meetings, so other patients can come and share their thoughts, provide comments during an open public hearing session or through our FR notice, our Federal Register notice. To the left, divisional assignments and listening sessions, those are other opportunities where patients engage with the agency, but it's just up further in the timeline. And of course, the agency's patient-focused drug development meetings, which take place even earlier and help us gain a better understanding of the disease area by hearing directly from patients and their families about symptoms that really matter to them most. And I didn't add this to the slide, and Deb had touched on it, but I think it's important to mention that patients are encouraged to contact sponsors and companies directly for information. Even though here at the agency we are prohibited by law not to discuss details of applications, companies can be more transparent about their processes. So it's something to keep in mind. Next slide. So just a little more about the Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting. I just wanted to share that we have had 20 meetings since 2013, fiscal year 2013, and we have a few added for this year: sarcopenia, autism, alopecia areata, and hereditary angioedema. The last two we don't have dates for, but feel free to go to our website and learn about the dates. The sarcopenia meeting is on April 6th, and the autism meeting is on May 4th. Next slide. So FDA launched this patient preference initiative led by the agency's Center for Devices and Radiological Health, really to develop a systematic way of incorporating patient preference information into the medical device total product life cycle. So as a result, we can identify benefits and risks of the technology that are most important to patients. We can clarify how patients think about the trade-offs of benefits and risks for technology, and we can show how patient preferences vary across the population. Next slide. And in September 2015, the FDA announced its first Patient Engagement Advisory Committee, which is still in development. It is being established to make sure that the needs and the experiences of patients are included as part of the FDA's discussion on complex issues involving the regulation of medical devices and their use by patients. The committee can talk about a various number of topics, such as guidance and policies, patient preference study design, device labeling, available alternatives, patient-reported outcomes, and such. Next slide. So some of the take-homes. We've covered a lot, but in the summary, I think the take-homes are pretty simple. Ask questions, and the more you ask, the more you'll learn what the right questions are. Learn about medical product development by participating in webinars, going on our patient network website, attending public meetings so that you can decide where and when and how to engage with us. Share your lessons learned with your colleagues, of course, and with other patients and advocates, and ask more questions. There's really always more to learn. And that's it.
Fantastic. Deb and Selena, thank you so much. For the next portion, I am going to turn it over to Molly White, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, and then also James Valentine. Just a bit of background on these presenters. Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation last year had a externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, which is the same meeting that we are preparing for coming up in April. So we're interested to hear from the patient advocacy side some ways that we can maximize this opportunity. And James is actually going to be moderating our upcoming patient-focused drug development meeting, and so he'll be able to provide some advice on that front. I'm actually, though, first going to turn it over to Rosangel Cruz, who is on staff here at QRSMA. She's our Associate Director of Clinical Affairs, and she's going to lead the discussion with James and with Molly.
Hello, everyone. This is Rosangel. Thank you, Megan. I thought James is going to give the overview, a little bit of background on the patient-focused drug development, so the first two slides, and then I'm going to briefly speak to you about how you can participate and more information on logistics about this meeting. So, James, do you want to start us off on this discussion?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rosangel, and thank you, Megan and QRSMA for having us today and having this chance to talk to all of you in the SMA community about this opportunity to participate in a patient-focused drug development meeting. Selena gave some background about many different ways that you as patients and caregivers can participate and engage with FDA. And this is one of those specific ways, and Selena did present a slide that gave some background about what FDA has done on the patient-focused drug development side. But now we've shifted to a paradigm where FDA is allowing external groups such as yours, such as QRSMA, to host these meetings themselves and invite FDA to attend. However, as we'll discuss, these meetings are being modeled after the FDA meetings and are seeking the same things as the FDA meetings. So we actually have a lot, even though this is one of the very first externally led PFDD meetings, we have a lot of experience from all of FDA's 20-plus meetings to build on. So these patient-focused drug development meetings, just to reiterate a little bit of what Selena said, are a way for FDA and other stakeholders to hear from patients and caregivers in a systematic way that collects the patient and caregiver experience with the disease, but is not specific to any particular product that's in development, unlike the FDA Patient Representative program that Selena talked about, where patients or caregivers are asked to advise FDA or participate in advisory committee meetings to discuss particular products in development or product applications. This is a way to gather the patient's perspective on both their burden of disease and how they're managing their disease outside of any particular program. And the benefit of this is that it allows then FDA to utilize this information across all of the development programs that are going on for your disease. So FDA is very interested in a couple categories of information, which I'll talk about on the next slide, please. So the patient-focused drug development meetings are organized and solicit input from you all in the community through a number of ways. And as meeting attendees, you'll have an opportunity to answer both polling questions as well as participate in a moderated discussion as an audience member to help provide your experiences and input. And the agenda is organized in a way to cover the two topics that FDA has identified as being very useful for their regulatory decision making. The first is to learn about your experiences with your disease symptoms and how those symptoms impact your daily life and your quality of life. The second category then shifts gears a little bit and involves discussions of issues around how you approach treating your disease. And this is beyond just drug therapies, but can also include procedures, lifestyle modifications, diet, exercise, anything that you might do to try to alleviate symptoms or just manage your day-to-day life. And then finally, the discussion of treatments shifts from current treatments to future treatments. And so there's some discussion of what are your preferences as patients in terms of what you would want to see out of future therapies. And of course, we would all say that we would want to see a cure. So it's in the context of short of a cure, what would you prioritize and want to see? So with that, I'll hand it back over to Rose Angel to talk about some of the specifics of this meeting.
Thank you, James. Again, we could not be more grateful and excited to be able to bring the voices of our SMA community in front of the FDA so they can hear from each patient, from families, from caregivers, everyone who's touched by SMA, directly from them. What are the things that matter most? What do they consider clinically meaningful? And what does it mean to live with SMA or with a child with SMA day to day? So who is invited to participate in this meeting? So as I mentioned, essentially anyone who is touched by a spinal muscular atrophy, families, caregivers, and patients of all types, ages, and stages of SMA. Also participating at this meeting will be patient advocacy organizations, as well as members of industry, some of whom are involved in clinical trials in SMA, as well as key FDA leaders who are involved in the decision drug making or drug decision process. We also have an outstanding group of individuals who will be representing the voices of the SMA community through a panel. We'll have panelists, separate panels for SMA type 1, and then a mixed panel for SMA types 2 and 3. all of whom will be discussing what their experiences with SMA, their journeys with SMA, in the context of the two key topics that James just discussed: impact of the disease and burden, and also approaches to management of the condition. And we trust that their stories will echo the voices of the SMA community at large. As you all know, the Cure SMA is hosting this meeting in collaboration, of course, with the MDA, the SMA Foundation, and Cure SMA industry collaboration. We will have participation by FDA leaders who are responsible for reviewing applications for drugs to treat this condition. We'll also have designated speakers who will also be joining us and representing the FDA at our meeting. As many of you have heard and read, the meeting will take place on Tuesday, April 18th, and it begins at 8 through 5 p.m., so it will be an all-day meeting. Again, the morning focusing on the impact of SMA discussions in 2 panels, including a group discussion with the audience and people participating online, and then an afternoon discussion focusing on the second topic. In terms of location and where this meeting is taking place, the meeting will be held at College Park Marriott Hotel and Conference Center, and that will be in Hyattsville, Maryland. Or you obviously can join us and participate via a live webcast. And why is this important? And I hope we have at this point conveyed the importance of your participation and your sharing your stories and your voice and the uniqueness of your journey with each of the folks at the FDA who want to hear what you have to say. So this is everyone's opportunity, your opportunity to share your voice with the FDA and then take part in the drug development process. And in the voices of the FDA, next slide, please. The patient-focused drug development meetings give the FDA an important opportunity to hear directly from patients, patient advocates, and caretakers about the symptoms that matter most to them, the impact of the disease on patients' lives and patients' experiences, and the treatments that are currently available for this community. And with that, I'll hand it over to Molly, who will be sharing a bit with us about the meeting format and ways that you can effectively participate at these meetings. Thank you all, and Molly, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, and thanks to Cure SMA for including MDF on this call. It's very exciting to hear you guys planning what I'm sure is going to be a really strong meeting, and I think you'll be thrilled with the outcomes and the impact that this meeting is going to have. I can tell you that MDF, which is the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, had the first externally led meeting, so we were a little bit without a particular game plan or path, and we worked closely with James Valentine, from whom you've just heard, about how to frame up that meeting. In terms of the program that we put on, I would say some of the learnings that we came away with were, number one, we had 8 panelists across 2 panels, and we knew that we only had time for 5-minute presentations from each of those panelists. So it was really important to do a couple things. One, ensure that across those panel presentations, the key messages that were most likely to represent the broader community perspective and opinion on issues around living with the disease and impacts of the disease on daily life and disease burden were as representative of the full community as possible. It was also really important that we make sure that they stayed within their 5-minute window. So we actually worked with our panelists to develop draft remarks. We had them practice those remarks with each other on the phone. People could determine when they had overlap with other people's remarks, and they could figure out when they were going over. And then we helped them edit and bring those back down to 5-minute presentations. And what that did for us was create a real comfort level on the part of the panelists that they would be reading remarks that would be 5 minutes long and that would add a lot of value to the overall conversation. And it also made it possible for them to relax, inject some humor into the presentations, and really have a strong presentation overall. So understanding that you have a window, understanding that you want your remarks to be as representative of the community as possible and as high priority in terms of the key messages you want to deliver to the FDA as possible is really important. And then I think it's just important to make sure that you stay within your time frame. And I think writing your remarks and practicing them and reading them is a nice way to make sure that all happens. We found that with the moderated discussion, we have learned in our own conferences that a methodology that works best for us is not to simply open the mic, but to have people submit questions on cards and then address those questions. This isn't necessarily a format where you can do that, but one thing that we did in terms of the webinar that we held with our community before the meeting was to really emphasize to people the importance of keeping comments and questions short and brief and not to simply say me too, because you have this one opportunity to present a PFDD meeting to FDA leadership that really want to hear from you about the most critical high priority components of your disease, both in terms of the burden and in terms of what you seek from therapies. And you don't want to waste that with any extraneous comments that aren't continuing to drive towards the key messages that you're delivering for FDA. So those are a couple of the takeaways that we had, both in terms of the panel presentations and the moderated discussion. I think the last thing I would say is that the voice of the patient report that comes out of the meeting that you'll hold is a really important meeting. And it's an opportunity to summarize what you have shared with the FDA live in that meeting and ensure that that key information is put in the hands of the review division that will be reviewing your potential therapies. So it really ties back to my earlier statement around make sure that the messages you deliver are high priority key messages, because that's what will end up in your voice of the patient report. And that's what you want the FDA review division to be reading when they go to that material to consider potential therapies. And I want to be careful not to go over my allotted time, whatever that was. So I'll hand it back to you, Rosangel.
Yes.
Or James.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. So now as we wrap up our discussion of the patient-focused drug development meeting, I want to tie it back to something that Dev had talked about at the very beginning of the presentation. He had explained how FDA has a benefit risk framework for which it uses to kind of record and communicate the benefits and risks that are information that are generated from the drug development program for a particular product and how it makes its benefit risk judgment decision. So one of the really cool things about patient-focused drug development is it was actually linked directly to this benefit risk framework instrument. And so the very first two rows of that instrument that FDA looks at when it's making an approval decision are actually the same two topics that I described a little earlier that you'll be discussing with FDA and other stakeholders at the patient-focused drug development meeting. The first being what is referred to on this slide as the analysis of the condition, which is the discussion of the burdens and symptoms that are most important to patients, as well as the impacts on your day-to-day living. And then the second category being current treatment options, which is the second topic discussed at a patient-focused drug development meeting, discussing what is really the unmet medical need that you as a community still have to treat those symptoms and burdens. So the information that's collected from you at the patient-focused drug development meeting at the end of that voice of the patient report is summarized and put into those first two rows of the benefit risk framework and is basically serves as a draft of the first two rows for FDA. So that way, when it then goes to look at the next three rows, which are on benefit risk and risk management, FDA can view the benefits and risks through the therapeutic context or through that lens that you've helped establish for them, which in a way provides them the preferences, or at least the context through which to balance benefits and risks. So it really is a great opportunity to have a direct impact on drug development and review. And so hopefully all of you that are on the webinar today will participate, and I'll turn it back over to Rose Angel to remind you all how to do that.
Thanks, James. This is Megan. I'm actually going to step in and take over this last part. So the patient-focused drug development meeting, it's kind of the last thing we want to talk about before we get to some questions, is how you can participate. I know that many of you have already registered. That's how you heard about this webinar. But if you have not already registered to participate, we really encourage you to do so. So it says to register, click here. Obviously, through the webinar, that does not quite work, but the link was given earlier, and then I will also pull it up at the very close of this meeting. But it's events.curesma.org/PFDD meeting. And what's really cool, I think, in addition to what our panelists have already talked about, but one other thing that's really cool about this meeting is that there are 2 ways to participate. So as Rose Angel mentioned, this is held in Maryland. It's near Washington, D.C. And so for those of you who are able to come and attend in person, that's fantastic. We are looking forward to seeing many members of our community, but we know certainly that that kind of travel is not possible for everyone. So what we also have is a live streaming webcast. And so from the comfort of your own home, you're going to be able to see the panelists, to hear the discussion, and I think even more importantly, to submit your own comments through the live stream and participate in the discussion that way. So again, through these 2 ways, we're really hoping to open this up to as many people as possible within our community. And again, I'll put the link at the end as well as this email address at the end, but if you have questions about registration or about what's involved in both the webcast and the live in-person attendance, please feel free to email either info@curesma.org or research@curesma.org, and we're happy to go ahead and answer those questions for you. I did want to leave time for just a little bit of Q&A. Thank you to all of you who sent in the questions. Again, I want to reiterate, we do save all of these questions. We use them to guide future communications, to develop topics for future webinars. So please, right up until the very end of this webinar, please feel free to keep sending in those questions. But with that, I'll get to a couple of the questions that we've received thus far. And this first question, perhaps I'll direct initially to Dev and or Selena, and then maybe ask Molly and James to weigh in as well. But I like this question because I think it really reflects something we hear often from our community, which is that for a treatment, small changes would make a huge difference. Something like being able to brush my own teeth or to brush my own hair would make a really tremendous difference in my life. And so the question there is, what's the best way for us to help the FDA when the FDA looks at, what changes have been produced by a drug, to really help them understand that even a small change can be huge for our community. So again, Selena and or Dev, I'll let you kind of maybe speak first from the FDA perspective, and then Molly and James, if you have any sort of practical tips on that, I'll let you jump in as well.
Okay, so this is Dave. I think it's a great question. This is the reason why these sort of avenues are important, for patient, communities to convey to the FDA what's important to them, and for them to be able to say, these activities are not just trivial, but they're really important to us. So the FDA encourages endpoints that evaluate, function. And there isn't any set of, function that the FDA prefers one over the other. Anything that will help a patient function better is something that the FDA would be very interested in. One thing that I should also say is that the community should seek ways to discuss with the sponsors of studies, in the very early phases, so that they can use the endpoints that the community, that the patients think are important. Because you can have a study that is completed, but if they're not using the endpoints such as these that you think are important, then it's not going to be that much helpful with regard to whatever areas of interest. For example, if there is a study that used endpoints such as brushing the hair, or teeth, or using hands to eat with a fork and knife, these are our writing. These are functional endpoints that could be used in studies, and the FDA encourages the use of these endpoints in studies. Back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I have another question, and again, maybe Selena and Dev, I'll let you take this one first, and then James and Molly, if you have anything to sort of to add at the end. But this is a little bit of a nuance for our community with respect to benefit risk, and I'll give a little bit of background to this individual's question. So all types of SMA have the same underlying genetic cause, and so many of these therapies that are being developed that attack those genetics could be used by anyone with any type of SMA. But what this individual's question is, so you have one treatment that could perhaps work for all types, but the benefit risk profile of each type could be different. This individual says, my child has type 2, I might take less risk than someone with type 1, but might take more risk than someone with type 3. So the question is, does the FDA give input at this level, or does something like that really come down to a personal choice of how much risk I want to take on?
So if the patient community communicates to us the level of risk that they are interested in, we take that, the FDA takes that into consideration. So if there is a study of a drug that had very significant risks, based on input from the community, the FDA will look at and see the benefit in terms of the risks that the community has said that they would tolerate. So when it comes to the subtypes that are willing to not take as much risk as the more severe subtypes, it again kind of boils down to, after approval, of a personal decision making. But at the time of approval, we kind of take the broad input into consideration. We kind of decide, is there enough benefit in here to outweigh the risks across the disease subtypes, and is there sort of information that's available that can be relied upon to make those kind of determinations. But after approval, of course, it comes down to a personal choice.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we have time for just one more question, and Molly and James, I'll send this to you first. So both of you sort of mentioned the importance of really using this patient-focused drug development meeting to present a unified voice to represent the broader concerns of our entire community. So we do have one question, though, that says, what if somebody, either a panelist or somebody in the moderated discussion, says something that I disagree with, or says something that's been contrary to my own experience? Should I speak up? You know, kind of how do we manage this balance of wanting to represent all the diverse voices within our community, but also, you know, presenting a unified voice?
James,
So,
you want to tackle that as moderator?
I can start with that. So, you know, I think one of the things that FDA is interested in is knowing the range of experiences within the patient community. You know, the fact that there will be different experiences, some more common maybe than others, doesn't mean that FDA, you know, only wants the most common experiences. It's important for FDA both in advising companies on how to proceed with designing clinical trials and what, you know, what patients within the overall community to include in clinical trials or a particular clinical trial. You know, it would be useful for them to know the different range of experiences, whether that be disease progression over time or heterogeneity in the different symptoms that are experienced, or maybe even severity in particular symptoms, or maybe differences in how particular patients are able to respond to available treatments or procedures that are out there. And so while there will certainly be common themes across the patient community, the details for every patient are going to be different. And so one of the goals for the PFDD meeting, and then ultimately the Voice of the Patient report, will be to try to find the balance of helping FDA understand the common threads that run through the community, as well as breaking out, where appropriate, an understanding of the differences. So if you're in that situation where either, you know, maybe the whole panel didn't reflect your experience, or something seemed contrary to your experience, I would encourage you to definitely in that situation, you know, raise your hand and ask to be called on, so that way, you know, we can hear that diversity and experience.
Great. Thank you again so much, Deb, Selena, Molly, and James, for your time and for your expertise. I know I speak for the whole community when I say that we really appreciate the time that you've given to this. Just a couple quick reminders. We have only about a minute before the top of the hour, and I want us to end on time, respect everyone's time. But don't forget, please, register for the Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting. Again, events.curesma.org/PFDD meeting. We've also announced this on our news blog, curesma.org/news, and so you can find the announcement there, and then within that find a link. Or we have, under the Get Involved tab on our website, we have an events calendar, and this is included there as well. So many ways for you to find the link and be able to register. Again, if you want to attend the live stream or participate in the live stream or attend in person, both of those do require registration, and both of those happen through the same site. So make sure that you go ahead and take care of that. And then again, info@curesma.org. Questions on this webinar, questions on our broader program of FDA engagement, or questions on the Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting, really questions on any of those topics, we're happy to field through that email address, or again by calling our office, and we'll put you in touch with the right person. Again, thank you everyone so much for your time. I want to thank our panelists again as well. With that, we'll sign off, but we are looking forward to April 18th and having as many voices in our community participate as possible. So thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.